We'll just give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get going. Okay, I think it's best we get going. Let me get back to the shared slides. Oops. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? I actually can't see the chat function or Zoom when my screen is being shared, so just shout out if you can't hear me and let me know anytime if anything's unclear. So today we're going to be looking at why some children struggle to follow instructions. My name's Amy. I'm from Intercare Health Centre. I'm one of the speech therapists here, and I'll go through what we'll be focusing on. So first of all, we're going to look at the process of following instructions. So what does it look like in a child's brain in order for them to hear what you're saying and then complete the action? What happens if there's breakdown in this process? So it's a chain, and what happens in that chain? What happens to the child's ability to follow an instruction if that chain is broken? What is the role of a speech and language therapist within following instructions and understanding? What are the risk factors? So this is things that typically we all do when we're giving instructions to children that can make it a little bit more difficult for them to follow. And then we'll go on to talk about what can we do differently. So what are the strategies that we can use to make it easier for the children to follow our instructions? And these are specific to supporting you guys in following instructions at home. It's a very activities and discussion-based training. So there will be activities throughout. Please do try and get involved. Give it a go, see how it makes you feel. And if at any point you feel like you want to share a story about your child following instructions, or something sits with you and you just want to talk about it, then please feel free to speak up or put some comments in the chat box. And there will be time for questions at the end, but please feel free to ask at any time. I don't mind like the question asking as I'm speaking. Just put it in the chat box, or if you want to speak out loud, just raise your hand. And then if someone, Mara, if you could let me know, then that'd be great, because I really cannot see the Zoom screen at all. Okay, so we'll just start off with talking about the chain. So this is a very simplistic model of what it looks like for a child to be able to follow an instruction, going from hearing what you say all the way up to completing that instruction. So let's start off with hearing. Did that child physically hear the instruction that you've given? Attention and listening. Was the child mentally tuned in? Can they sustain their attention? Auditory processing. Can the brain process the sounds and the order of the words and the sounds in order to process what's been said? Language comprehension. So does that child understand the words, understand the sentence, understand the grammar, the concepts, that kind of thing? Working memory. So can the child hold that instruction in their memory long enough to act on it? Executive functioning. So can the child plan, stay on task, start the task, initiate it? Action. So motor planning and execution. Can the child physically carry out the instruction? And then self-monitoring and completion. So did the child check? Did they check that they're getting things right? Did they think about what they were doing and to compare it to what you had said? Have they been able to adjust if they've realized they're making some errors? And did they even get to finish the task? So you can see there are quite a lot of stages, and this is a simple model. So here I've got, what, 6, 7, 8 stages. So it sounds like, oh, they're just hearing and they're doing, but you can see inside the brain, there is so much more going on. And even if a child has heard you, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have processed what you've said, that their brain has listened to what you've said, that they understand what you say, that they remember what you say, that they can then execute those steps and complete it. So there are lots of occasions where breakdown can happen. So if any part of that chain is broken, the child will likely have difficulty following an instruction. Even when a child is trying really hard, they might be really trying to focus, really listening in, looking at you, turning their ear to you. They might be trying really hard to get going with the task, but then can't remember the steps. If there's one small part that is broken, it can have a huge impact on that child's ability to follow an instruction. So what might this look like? Before I reveal anything, I just want you guys to have a think about when you're at home, or if there's any speeches in the group when you're in your sessions and the children you're with are not able to follow the instructions. What does that look like? How do you know they're not following the instructions? What does that look like to you? What are the red flags that are showing? I'm going to see if I can get the chat box up. If anyone wants to put anything in there, or if you want to, you can shout something out. So I'll give you an example. An example of someone showing that they're unable to follow an instruction is that they just don't respond. They just sit there and don't even move. Can anyone think of anything else? Yeah, exactly, Aria. They might respond incorrectly. So they might start. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. They might start responding, but then they actually get the process wrong. So you might have said, can you go get your shoes on? And they go and get their coat. Or they go and get their shoes, but they don't put them on. Avoidance, yeah. So you give the instruction and then they actually avoid answering it or avoid a part of that instruction. They keep doing what they're doing. Yeah, so they're already colouring in and then you say, right, it's time to go get your pajamas on, and they carry on colouring in. It's like you haven't even said anything. Absolutely. Yeah, shy away from it. So you're saying, you need to go do this, 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 this. And then they're like, whoa, hang on, let me just carry on what I'm doing. And they don't even focus on what that is. Or if the task is a little bit hard for them, they might be like, actually, yeah, I'm not doing that one. Tantrums, absolutely. Yeah. There are loads of things we want our children to be doing at home that they necessarily don't want to do. And the same in school, they're told to do lots of things that they don't necessarily want to do. And even in our therapy sessions, we try and make it child-led and focused and fun. but like we're always going to end up giving instructions that the child necessarily doesn't want to do. So it can lead to tantrums. But also, if a child has difficulty understanding the language and they're more maybe aware of that, then it can lead to tantrums, absolutely. Poor compliance, yeah. So it comes across like they're not listening or they're not following the instruction or they don't want to do something. So it comes across like poor compliance, yeah. Okay, let me reshare my screen. Thanks for participating, guys. Okay. So I'll just quickly fly through these because really we covered loads of them. Give me a sec. No response. They only follow part of the instruction. Incorrect response, inconsistent responses. They respond worse in a group setting. So for example, when you give them an instruction one-to-one, when it's just you and them, they follow that instruction. But when they're sat down with their siblings or the rest of the family, they have difficulty following that instruction. They look like they're just staring into space or daydreaming when you're giving the instruction. They might start completing the instruction or even finish it, but they make errors that they don't even notice they've made. They have difficulty following instructions when it's really noisy. So again, when you're sat in a one-to-one or a quiet environment, they can follow the instruction. But as soon as there's some background noise like the TV or the siblings chatting in the background, or even something small like the fan or the AC going on, then they have difficulty following instructions in those occasions. They keep asking you to repeat your instruction. They follow the instruction, but they get the steps all muddled up. They rely on you checking in and making sure they're following it correctly and actually getting on with it. They do something wrong, but they do it with confidence, so they're not aware that they're doing it wrong. They struggle with more complex instructions. So if you said something really simple and routine-based, like put your shoes on, and you pass them their shoes and they can follow it. But if you said, can you go and put your toy in the box next to the sofa? There's just a lot more language in that instruction and they might have more difficulty. Reliance on you prompting, they start, but then they forget what they're doing. They avoid some of the steps, maybe, for example, the ones that require coordination if they don't have that action ability or planning ability. They appear slow or unmotivated, so not confident with their, or not bothered by the instruction. And sometimes it can look like tasks left unfinished, especially if you've given a list of instructions, like you've told them to do A, B, and C, but they only do A. So we're going to do a little activity. So I'm going to give you an instruction and I want you to try and follow it exactly. So listen really carefully. I want you to take your phone and put it Badjo, the table, then write your name on Karatasi. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing again so I can see the chat, or if anyone wants to speak up out loud, please do. Was anyone able to follow that instruction? Did anyone feel that was easy or hard? No, exactly. That instruction was not possible to follow unless you speak, I think the first word is in French and the second word is in Swahili. Unless you speak those languages, there is no way, both of those languages, there is no way you could follow those instructions. So this is trying to show you that even when a child is trying really hard, they want to participate, they want to follow your instruction, they want to be a good child, but they have difficulty with their language comprehension. If we think back to that model that I showed you, that chain, the language is where the chain is broken. If they have difficulty understanding things like on, concepts like prepositions on the table, or if they have difficulty with some of their vocab, like I said, write your name on paper, on the paper, then they might not understand what to do. So it's not to do with the fact that they're not listening or that they don't want to follow the instruction, but actually some of those words don't mean anything to them yet, and therefore they're unable to follow the instruction no matter how hard they try. And we'll get to know a bit later on what kind of strategies we can use to support children who have difficulty understanding language. Does anyone want to share like any experiences or like how that made them feel themselves, or if you feel like sometimes your children are unable to follow instructions because of language? If you want to share any stories, please feel free to put it in the group chat. Okay, Another activity for you guys. So I'm going to give you an instruction and I want you to try and follow it exactly. Okay. Now, was anyone able to follow that instruction? Did anyone hear the instruction? Was anyone able to read my lips to follow the instruction from what I was saying? No, exactly. So this can show you that if a child has a hearing impairment or if they're unable to process auditory information, then they're going to have difficulty following your instruction. It's obviously not exactly how a child would perceive the information if they had auditory processing difficulties, but it's just the best way to get you guys involved with how a child might be feeling in those moments. So, for example, someone put at the beginning about how they carry on doing what they're doing. So if a child is really distracted, they're not able to attend to what you're saying, then they're sat on a table colouring in and you're giving them an instruction. They haven't attended to you to then process the information that you're saying. So then it might not be that they're not listening. They might have heard you, but actually their brain hasn't processed what you're saying and therefore they then can't follow that instruction. But it's nothing to do with them not listening or not wanting to do what you've told them to or misbehaving. Okay, let's do one more activity and then we'll move on. So again, I'm going to give you a verbal instruction. I want you to follow that instruction, but I don't want you to start until I finish. So I'll say go when I finish giving the instruction. So I want you to open a new tab on your browser, type the name of your favorite animal, then return to this screen. Write in the chat and press enter after you've also added one emoji. Go. Okay, so I can see Aria has been able to follow a part of the instruction. Obviously, I don't know if she's followed all of it. But did anyone feel like they were able to follow the whole instruction? Aria, do you feel like you followed every step of that instruction? And for those of you that haven't written anything in the chat, what has stopped you from being able to follow that instruction? What made it difficult for you? The reason I'm getting us to have a go at doing these kind of things is just so that we can all feel what it might feel like for those children who have a broken chain. If they're experiencing a break on that chain that we spoke through at the start, then this is what they might feel like. They might feel confused, they might feel overloaded, they might shy away from it. It might lead to those behaviors that we're seeing. Yeah, absolutely. Information overload. I gave way too many steps there. I used like before you do this, after you do that. I used complex language. It was really long sentences. I didn't emphasize any key words. Absolutely. And can you see how that feels really like, whoa, hang on a minute, how am I meant to be doing that when there's so much going on? So yeah, we're all adults in this group and I'm making the assumption that none of us have a broken link on that chain when we're following instructions, and we're still finding it hard to follow those instructions, and we're still having those feelings of feeling overwhelmed or confused, or like a feeling that I'm trying really, really hard and I'm still not able to get it. Okay, let's move on. So what I'm showing here is that if your child struggles to follow an instruction, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not listening or they're being naughty. It might mean that there is a broken link to the chain, especially if your children are under speech and language therapy. There may be under speech therapy for receptive language difficulties, so difficulties understanding, or auditory processing difficulties, or difficulties with their attention and listening. They might be under speech therapy because of their hearing or their cognitive skills, like their executive functioning skills, their ability to start tasks, complete tasks, monitor their tasks, that kind of thing. And that means that there is a broken link in this chain somewhere. So what is the role of a speech and language therapist? So we can do classroom observations for your children at school, and that way we can see if the teacher or yourselves are concerned about the children following instruction. I'm going to make this specific to following instructions. There's obviously a much wider role to speech therapy than just following instructions, and we'll cover a lot of that in the future training sessions. I know Ari explained the huge role of speech therapy in the last training session. But yeah, this is just going to be specific to understanding and following instructions. So we can do classroom observations where we can look at to see, is the child able to follow a classroom instruction? What's stopping them from being able to follow that instruction? Are there any strategies that we can give to the teacher to adapt their language to better support the child in following any instructions? And we're going to go through strategies for you guys to use at home later. If we feel it's necessary, then we can do an assessment, both formal, informal, dynamic assessment. There's different assessment techniques. And we can look at your child's level of understanding, and we can look at that chain and we can see, is there a part broken? And if so, where is that broken chain? And that way we can educate you, we can educate the teacher, and we can target therapy towards that broken area of the chain. We can also then find strategies that can support the child, and we can work on those strategies with the child so that, you know, we can figure out what works, what doesn't work, how do we implement those strategies. And we can give you guys and the teacher activities and strategies that you can use at home. Because we might see your child 1, 2, 3 times a week, but that's just not enough for anything to generalize out to the home setting or the classroom setting. We really need to work collaboratively with you guys, with the teachers, so that we can generalize all those skills that we learn in therapy, but also to support you. Like, it can be so frustrating when a child isn't following instructions. I completely hear that. If you're in a rush in the morning and your child is stuck in the shower and you've shouted up 10 times to get out the shower, then absolutely that is frustrating. And we just want to make life easier for you. So we can identify why they're not following the instruction, and then are there any strategies you can use to make it easier? Then it will be helpful for home, and it helps generalize those skills. We can suggest adaptations. Like, for example, we might say that you need some visual timetables up. For example, in the morning routine, if they're having difficulty following those steps, you might have a visual for that, where you say, like, you wake up, you make your bed, you jump in the shower, you eat breakfast, you get dressed, you eat breakfast, then we leave. And that's kind of all visual for them to see. And if they're having difficulty following any of your instructions, you can just point them in that right direction. And we also give training. So, for example, today, I'm giving some training where I'm just talking through some universal strategies. So these are just generic strategies that can help children to better follow instructions. But if you do want some more specific strategies, or you already started using some but they're not quite working, just chat to your child's speech and language therapist. They'll all be able to help with giving some advice on what strategies you can use at home. But we will run through some today. And the goal for today for you guys is to just try and take one of those strategies. There are quite a few, but just take one of those strategies and try and give it a go and see if you can make that one small change to better support that child. Okay, what's next? So instruction risk factors. So these are things that all of us do. I mean, even us, we're trained speech therapists. We learn how to best communicate with children. We learn how to make instructions simple and support the child. And we still make these, we still use these types of ways of communicating with children when giving instructions. And they're just things that make instructions a bit more difficult to follow. So, for example, you can see here that one of them is using questions instead of instructions. So you might say, oh, do you want to come with me to the park? Or can you go and put your shoes on? And that's giving the child an option to say no. We're not giving an instruction, we're asking a question. Now, if someone came up to me on my lunch break and said, hey, do you want to go get a coffee? I'm not taking that as, let's go get a coffee. I'm taking that as, they've asked me, do I want to? Which means I can say no if I don't want to. But if my manager came up to me and in a kind of stern voice said, shall we go for a walk? Or let's go for a walk, then I know for a fact that that is them telling me it's time to go. We need to go and have a walk right now. So you can see how asking a question instead of giving an instruction directly can be really confusing for your children, and it might stop them from being able to follow that instruction because They're processing it as, I have an option here, but also questions can be harder to understand than statements. The reason I started with this one is because I do this all the time. Like I said, I'm a trained speech therapist. We have these strategies drilled into us, and I still do things like asking questions. Can you go and put your shoes on? The other day at school, I asked somebody, do you want to come with me to my playroom? And he said, no, thank you. So I had to be like, oh, I mean, come with me. We're going to go play. Like, it's going to be fun. And I had to find a way to try and make that really fun and interactive because, yeah, I gave him a choice. And at the time, he was playing with his friends and he wanted to carry on playing with his friends. I'm a stranger. So that was interesting. And I'm really working hard on adapting that. Sometimes it's really good, especially if I'm specifically working on following instructions in a session. But if it's just a general chit chat or I've just met somebody, that's just the way I put it forward. So we all do these things. Don't feel like if any of these stand out to you, don't feel like it's a dig or you're doing something wrong because they are so natural to the way we communicate. So let's go through a few of these quickly. So giving instructions during busy routines. For example, at home, we're cooking dinner, the TV's on in the background, they're trying to get ready for their swimming lesson that's coming up, and you're telling them, can you go and pack your swim bag? Can you go and make sure there's your hat and your goggles in there and your swimmers are in there? Can you then get your shoes by the door so that they're ready for when you need to leave? And there's so much going on. Long strings of instructions. So go upstairs, brush your teeth, put your pajamas on, bring your book down, and then we can do some reading. There's just too many things going on. Calling from another room. So you're in one room, they're upstairs in the bathroom, and you're shouting out, can you get out the shower now? Or you're cooking dinner in the kitchen and they're watching TV in the living room. It's time for dinner. Like, they might not be able to follow through with those instructions because you're in a different room, they're less likely to process the information or attend to it, and maybe even hear it. Use of vague language. So for example, can you tidy up or tidy up? It's not very specific. If that child doesn't know the routine of tidy up yet, then that instruction might not be very helpful. Whereas if we said something like, put your toys in the box and held up the toys and showed where the box was, that might be a bit more easier. We spoke through using questions instead of instructions. Emotionally charged moments. So it's when we give instructions when the child is at an emotional state. So either they're really tired, they're really hungry, they're angry or upset. Giving instructions in those moments just doesn't allow the child to process the instruction. It makes it so much easier, so much harder to process language because, yeah, all the research shows that language processing drops when emotions rise. We use too many concepts. So concepts are things like big versus small, prepositions, quantities, times, that kind of thing. So we're adding in concepts into our instructions. That language is a bit more complex and then it's harder to follow the instruction. No routine language. So if you keep using different language for the same routine, then it's harder for the child to latch on to that language and understand it. So for example, in the morning, if you say, get dressed one day, put your school uniform on another day, get ready for school another day, then you're using different language for the same routine. Whereas if we stick to one form of saying an instruction for a specific routine, then it can be a lot easier for the child to understand that language and then follow it in the future. Repeating louder instead of simpler. So sometimes we find that when our children are not following our instructions, we just say it with a louder voice or we shout it. But sometimes it's that we need to make it simpler. We need to change the way we're saying it. And not checking for understanding. So we give the instruction, but then we don't check, has our child actually understood the language that we've used? Have they attended to it? Have they processed it? Have they been able to get going with initiating that task? So it's worth just asking the child if they understand. And we'll go through some of the specific strategies that you can use to target these risk factors. Okay, so do you feel like any of you do these yourselves? Did any of those stand out to you? Like I said, I regularly ask questions when I'm giving instructions, and it's something that I'm actively working on not doing. Does anything stand out to you guys? Because I want everyone to know that we all do this. We all make these errors when we're giving instructions, and they're not really errors. They are more natural ways of communicating that we use as adults, but it just makes it harder for the child, especially if they've got a broken link in that chain to follow an instruction. So yeah, really have a think about which ones of these stand out to you as something that you do, and the one that stands out the most, that's the one you're going to focus on changing. So for example, I know I use questions. I'm really focusing on not asking questions, and just having that one goal for yourself when you're giving an instruction makes it a lot easier for you and for the child to follow the instruction. So now for the most helpful part, the actual practical strategies to use at home. And like I just said, just pick one. Even if you can just take home one strategy from this training, small changes make a big difference. If that child can then, if you can adapt your language in just one small way, so that child can then follow your instruction, it's going to make a huge difference, not just for you, but also for them. So I've broken it up into 4 sections. One is about reducing memory and attention load, another about reducing language confusion, another about supporting understanding and memory, and the last one about supporting attention, roughly. Some of them might not seem that relevant to each category, but they kind of roughly fit into those categories. So the first one, making it shorter. So we've got one step at a time. We know that instruction I gave during the activity at the start where there was lots of steps to it was really confusing and hardly anyone was able to complete the instruction. So instead of giving 3 or 4 steps in one sentence, it's worth trying to give one step at a time, let them complete that, and then give the next. If you do have to give a couple of instructions in one go, it's best to use first, then language. So first, put on your shoes, then put on your coat. And if you make it visual by, I don't know if you can see me, but if you can, make it visual by using your hands. So first we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. That will make it a bit more visual for them. So first shoes, then park. It also gives a reward. So if you're doing something like going to the park or going to read a story, you could do first pajamas, then story, first shoes, then park. And they're motivated to follow that first instruction because of the reward that's coming next. Repeat with support. So if they don't respond, don't just say the instruction louder. Try and shorten it. Try and use some strategies to make it simpler. We're going to go through how to make instructions more clearer, but also how to make them more simple in a bit. But some of the ideas to that might be using visuals like I just did, using your hands, using gesture. Can you put it in the box? Can you put it on the table? Pointing to different things. If you're saying, can you tidy up, I'm using questions again, tidy up your toys, you might actually point to the toys or pick up the toys yourself and put it in the box to show them that's how they're going to tidy up. Really emphasize the key words. So put your shoes on and maybe even give them their shoes when you're telling them to put them on, so that it makes it even more visual. And the last one, pause before expecting action. So after you give the instruction, just pause, even just for a few seconds, because it takes time for children to process things. Sometimes it takes time for us to process things. So just allow them that time to go through that sequence. Like, it happens so quickly, but that sequence is a whole chain of things that they're going through before they can even start completing the action, let alone finish it. So just give them some time to process what you've said, and then if they still don't respond, that's when you can then start to repeat and use other strategies. Okay, next. So we want you to use specific instructions. So we can use very empty language, like I said before, get dressed, tidy up, but it's about thinking about how can I make that more specifically. So how can I make that more specific? So for example, put your top on, put the cars on the shelf, and that way it's very explicit what you want. They're not having to infer anything or read between the lines at all. It's been very explicit as to what you want them to do. Turn questions into clear directions. We spoke about this a lot today. Can you tidy up? Could be put the toys in the box. Directions are much clearer than questions. Use routines and consistent phrasing. So try to keep routines the same every day. So the morning routine, the steps of that routine should hopefully be the same every morning. Obviously, I know home life can be manic, and if one day you just wake up late or there's a change to the schedule, it can be really difficult. But for the most of it, those morning routines, those nighttime routines, the schedules, when you're in a family, do stay quite consistent. So try and make them routines that they can follow. Every morning when they wake up, the first thing they do is help you make their bed. The next thing they do is get in the shower. The next thing they do is get dressed. Then they have their breakfast. And if we can start to make it a consistent routine, when you add instructions into that, it makes it a lot easier. And like I said before, Try and use routine language. So every day when they're getting ready in the morning, use the same language that you used the day before and the day before that when giving instructions. When we use the same words every day, they tend to learn those words and the meaning of those instructions a lot quicker. And the last one is check understanding. So a lot of the time we say, do you understand? Or did you get that? And kids automatically will say yes. It's very, very rare that a child will say no, even if they don't understand. So the best thing to say is something like, what are you going to do first? Or can you repeat that back to me? And that way you can really check in on their understanding before they get going. And it just avoids any frustration on your end or confusion and frustration on their end when they're trying to crack on with the instruction. Please do let me know if I'm going too fast or if you have any questions about any of the strategies as they come up. Okay, the next one is trying to make it a bit more visual. Or we will do some activities after these as well, just that we can have a go at trying to adapt some instructions ourselves to implement these strategies, and then hopefully they'll all be a bit more clearer for you. Okay, so making the instructions visual. Show as you say. So children process better and they have increased understanding when they can see what you do. So we always use a lot of gesture when we're communicating. Obviously, we use our speech, but speech is not the #1 form of communication. There are so many other modes of communication that we all use, even when we're verbal. So pointing, using gesture, modeling yourself, using visuals around the house. So for example, if you know that your child has difficulty knowing where to put their toys, it might be worth labeling their toy boxes with pictures of the toys. Like actually take a picture of the toy, print it out and stick it on the box. And that way they know this toy goes in this box because they match up. That toy matches this picture, they go together. You might want to use gesture, like I said, whether you're saying on or in, you can use gesture to show that next to or under, over. And again, your speech and language therapist can make this more or less generalized and more generalized. My brain has gone clear there. But your speech and language therapist can make this more specific, that's the word, more specific to your child if you need that. So for example, if you know that your child benefits from the use of gesture, they can talk through with you what kind of gestures you can use or what kind of, say, Makaton signs that you can use to support your child when following instructions. Use visual cues for routines. So again, visual schedules, like I discussed before, if there's a visual schedule for the morning routine or even for the day. So it really helps with transitions, but it also helps with following instructions. So for example, morning, you can even put morning routine. If they then know what their visual for the morning routine is, you can then say school, you can then say home, you can then say dinner, park, and you write that schedule in the morning with them. Or use some visuals if you've got pictures, or even just talk it through with them. And that way they know the schedule for the day and it makes it easier to follow the instructions, because if they're not, you can be like, look, we've finished doing the morning routine and now it's time to go to school, which means we first need to put our shoes on and then we need to put our coat on and then we go to school. So it's like adding in more visuals and more consistency and schedules to help them remember the instructions and understand the meaning and then follow them. And then the last one here is use objects to show the steps. So for example, if you're saying to your child, you want to put your shoes on or put your shoes on, actually hand them their shoes when you say that. Or if you're saying turn off the shower, go into the bathroom and initially you actually turn off the shower when you're saying turn off the shower. It makes it a lot clearer than saying time to get out or shower's finished if they can't initiate actually turning it off. So yeah, make it very specific, turn off the shower and you physically turn it off yourself. And then with time, if you keep using that consistent language within that routine, they should then be able to follow it too. And you can step back on having to physically turn it off yourself because they'll be able to do it eventually. And then the last section is reduce distractions. So we want to make sure we have our child's full attention and that there's nothing else going on that can stop them from being able to attend and listen and follow your instructions. So the first one is get close and gain their attention. So I mentioned before about not calling out from a different room. If you're in the kitchen, don't call into the living room. If you're in the bathroom, don't call down to downstairs. So go to your child, try and get down to their level, create some eye contact if that's appropriate for them. Say their name. If you need to get their attention outside of saying their name, you could lightly tap them on the shoulder or wave at them. And try and wait for a cue that they've acknowledged that you're there and that they're ready to listen to you. If they're still playing on their PlayStation or still coloring in or still using that toy, then you need to find a way to reduce that distraction by pausing the TV, pausing the game, holding up the toy yourself to your face so that then they're looking at you, or whatever works best for your child to gain their attention. Reduce the distractions. So like I said, turn off the TV, pause the game, or tell them to do that before you give the actual instruction, and try and make it like face to face so that they're actually acknowledging you in that presence, and then they feel more likely to follow that instruction. Avoid calling from another room. We just spoke about that. And then choose the right moment. Instructions are so much harder to follow when the child is tired or hungry or upset, like we said before. So really make sure that you're choosing the right moment. I know that is easier said than done. If you need something done now, then it needs to be done now, of course. But if it can wait until your child has maybe had their dinner first or had a snack, or if it can wait until the morning, then that's probably better, because when you're giving an instruction and they're in that emotional state, it's really difficult for them to follow that instruction. So try and choose those moments. But I totally understand that that is easier said than done at times. Okay, so let's have a little go at doing these yourselves. Oh, and this is just what I said before, is you don't need to do all of these. Even just one can help that child. And like I said, your speech and language therapist can make those strategies individualized for your children. So if you're having difficulty figuring out which one will work best for your child, then just ask your speech therapist. Or if you want to, at the end, if you feel comfortable, you can share a little bit about your child and we can all chip in to see which strategies you could trial first. So I'm going to give you an example of how we might adapt an instruction. I know I've been giving them throughout, but it's sometimes a bit helpful to have it visual. So an example of an instruction we might give at home is, Sam, can you go tidy up and get ready to go to the park? So there are two tasks in one sentence here. The language is very vague: tidy up, get ready. It's in a question format, so it sounds optional. There are no visuals, no physical cues. I didn't give any gesture when I said that. I didn't pass anything. I didn't point to anywhere. And it's just said, done. We're expecting it to happen, no processing time. So a more supportive version for that child to understand might be, firstly, we say, Sam, a light tap on the shoulder, and we pause to wait for that acknowledgement. Put your cars in the box, and you might point to the box, or you might physically pick up a car from the floor and put it in the box yourself. So you're modeling that to them. And then you might give a car to them and you pick up a car and you put it in the box and they copy you. And that way the instruction is getting going. You've helped them initiate that, helped them to understand it. Once they finish tidying up, you would then say, first shoes on, and hand them the shoes, pause, then park. So they know why they're putting their shoes on. They've got a reward at the end for putting their shoes on. They're going to the park. You've handed them their shoes, so you're putting the object with the instruction, and you've made it visual. But you've also used that first then language to make it a bit clearer, because there are two parts there. We've got the shoes and we've got the park. How can we break that up a little bit more? And again, we've put in some pauses to allow that processing time, but also for you to make sure that you've got their attention before you've given any more of the instruction. Can you see the difference there? How we've been able to break down that instruction and create a more supportive version without your child having to do anything differently. We've just taken that off the child and we've put it on ourselves to help to see what we can do differently to better help our children. Okay, time for you guys to give it a go yourselves. So this is about a typical routine, getting ready to leave the house. The instruction is, go upstairs, get dressed, brush your teeth, find your shoes and come down. I just want you to take, how much time do we have? Just a minute, just take a minute to try and have a go at giving a more supportive instruction. Whatever strategies you want to use, have a go. You can either put it in the group chat the way I laid it out before, and I can go back to this slide so you can see. Or you can just do it in your head or on your phone or on a piece of paper and keep it personal to yourself if you want to. But try and have a go, try and really have a go, because actually doing these activities and really thinking about how to use these strategies is what makes it easier in the real world. When you start really thinking, how can I adapt this? That's when the adaptation really happens with your children. Just take a minute. Does anyone feel comfortable sharing a more supportive way of giving this instruction, either in the chat or out loud? There's no right or wrong at all. Like, you can change it and adapt it in any way. And even if you just add in one strategy, that is perfect. There is definitely no right or wrong. So don't feel shy with it. Give it a go.
I believe because the instruction is very long, it's better to do it one by one.
Absolutely. Yeah. So breaking up the steps instead of giving it all in one go is definitely very helpful. So first of all, we're going to tell them to go upstairs and get dressed. So first go upstairs, then get dressed. Once they've done that, you can then give some more of the instruction. Yeah, perfect strategy to use there. Noor's put in the group chat to call his name to grab his attention. Absolutely. Ask him to go upstairs and go with him. Perfect. Sometimes it's so difficult once they go upstairs. We've done it a million times. We go upstairs and then we're like, hang on, why did we actually come upstairs? What was it that I was going to do? So going with them can mean that you can monitor and then you can help giving more of the instruction, or even give the instruction once you're upstairs. Instruct him by pointing to the objects and give one instruction at a time. Perfect. We're making it more visual, we're breaking it down, we're chunking it. Great.
We can also use visual schedule.
Yes, absolutely, because it's part of a routine. If you're doing this every single day, then you can make this more of a visual schedule. And even if it changes, you can change your visual schedule. I use a visual schedule in most of my speech therapy sessions, but I literally just draw it on a whiteboard. And I am the worst drawer. I have really bad art skills. The kids tell me that every day, but they still can see what it is, just basic drawings. And if your child is at reading level, then even putting simple words down can be really helpful. Perfect. So we'll move on to do another one. So homework or quiet time. So the instruction is sit nicely and do your homework properly. This one I want you to have a think about, firstly, why that's difficult to follow as an instruction, and then have a go at breaking it down, making it a bit more supportive. Again, I'll just give one more minute. So if we think back to those risk factors that I spoke through earlier, here we're using abstract language. So do your homework, sit nicely. What does sit nicely look like? That looks different to everybody. What I expect from a child in terms of sitting nicely might be different to what you expect, and different to what that child expects. So they're having to interpret what that means. Do your homework. What homework? How do I even initiate that task? The word properly, everyone has a completely different understanding of the word properly when it comes to homework. There's also no clear starting point. So sit nicely and do your homework. How do I actually start sitting nicely? How do I actually start doing my homework? Maybe a better way to start the instruction would be to sit at the table and you go and sit with them. And then the first step of doing your homework is opening a book or signing into the iPad. So that we're breaking down those steps of doing the homework. And then what we've also done here is we've not just given an instruction, but we've also given a behavioral expectation. So we've gone from telling them to do their homework and given that instruction to actually saying sit nicely. And then we're putting a lot of pressure on the behavior as well as the activity. And then it makes it more difficult to follow those instructions. Does anyone want to give an example of how we can make that more supportive? Yeah, thanks, Ruba. So Ruba's put in the chat, we can sit with them, create an area where they feel comfortable, go through the homework they have, and also maybe give breaks in between, and promise to give positive reinforcement. So how we said before that children are more likely to follow an instruction if they have a positive thing at the end. So they're more likely to get ready to leave the house if they can go to the park. So yeah, if they can do their homework and then it's time for dessert. So dinner before homework, dessert after homework. Giving breaks is really important as well. Like when we're at work and we're sat doing admin tasks, like how many times do we have to stand up and stretch our legs or go and get some water or just have a little look on our phone to like have a break from the work and then get back into it? Sometimes our children really need breaks in order to focus. And going through it with them, like really breaking down the steps in order to do their homework. How do we initiate this task? How do we get through it? How do we problem solve when there are issues? Perfect. Okay, one more activity and then I'll see if there's any questions. So this one's around bedtime routine. So the instruction is right. Oh, sorry. The instruction is right. It's bedtime now. Let's get ready. So again, think about why this is a hard instruction for children to follow when we think about those risk factors, and then what strategies can you use to make this more supportive? Again, feel free to put it in the chat if you want, or even just turn your mic on and give a more supportive instruction out loud. There's no right or wrong.
We can ask the child to put on the pajama, for example, instead of saying get ready.
Absolutely. It's bedtime now, let's get ready. So we're making the assumption that they know what get ready means in relation to bedtime. They're having to link those two parts of the sentences together in order to understand what let's get ready means. We're using really vague language, let's get ready, but instead we could make that more specific and say, put your pajamas on. And you could even hand them the pajamas as you say that. Absolutely. That's a really good strategy for this one. Again, we can add something at the end. So first pajamas, then story. And then they're more motivated to get their pajamas on. They attend to that information because they've heard, oh, we can get a story at the end. And you remember I spoke about trying to use consistent routine language. So pick something that works and then stick to it. So if you're going to use first pajamas, then story, if that works, try and use that same language every single time it's bedtime. And that way the child gets familiar with that language and then it's easier for them to understand and they retain it quicker and then they're more likely to follow it. Okay, and that's the end of my training. I've added in a reference list. As speech therapists, we're always keeping up to date with new research and what's going on outside of just us completing therapy with the children. And we use that to, one, deliver training, but also when we're seeing the children, we're always using evidence-based knowledge. So if anyone wants to check out any of these references, feel free. But they are like research articles, so sometimes can be a bit of a heavy read. And lastly, if anyone has any questions. Oh, it's not showing.
Your screen doesn't showing. For me, I cannot see it. I don't know if for the rest, but
maybe the sharing
we
stopped.
want to check the reference. Yeah, please.
Can we see now?
Yes.
Oh, the reference.
But if you can go back, yeah, perfect. Yeah.
So yeah, these are just a list of some of the references that I used. Some of it's just from my head. They're things that we learn over the years, and a lot of it comes from references or talking to other speech therapists, talking to you guys as parents and figuring out what works for your child. So yeah, there's a vast variety of sources that we use to support your children and support you. And we have a couple minutes for questions if anyone has any, or any stories they want to share or any comments. And thank you all for attending and participating. I appreciate all the participation. It makes it a lot easier for me to not just be talking at a screen the whole time. I'll give it a couple of minutes to see if any questions pop up. And if not, then You can all have a lovely evening. You're so welcome. Oh, you're all welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Have a nice evening. I'm glad it was helpful. And like I said, your speech therapists know your children better than I do, unless I am their speech therapist. So if you want any specific strategies, or you want to know out of these strategies which one you should really focus on with your children, then just ask your speech therapist. Have a lovely evening and nice to have you all here. Bye.